The Mannin Line with Andy Wint.
Pastor Mai, good afternoon. Welcome to Mannin Line on Manx Radio. You're on the air with Onken MHK Rob Callister, a member of the House of Keys from 2016, currently chair of the Planning Committee, chair of the Public Services Commission, vice chair of the Public Sector Pensions Authority, chair of the Select Committee of Tynwald on Dyslexia, Dyscalculia, Dyspraxia and Dysgraphia, political member for the Cabinet Office, member of the Tynwald Management Committee, member of the Select Committee on Poverty and member of the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association Isle of Man Branch Executive Committee. The question is, Rob Callister, how do you find time for all that?
We all find the time, Andy. Thank you so much for the invitation this afternoon. You work to your schedule, and as I say, I have a range of positions which I fully enjoy. And to be honest, I've held almost every single position in government over the last 7 years. The only two positions I haven't really held is in education and in Treasury, and of course, chair of OFT. But everything else, I've pretty much held every position in government over that 7-year period.
But how do you concentrate and not get sidetracked by because in politics everything swirls around? I mean, everybody hears what verge sometimes on insults and people dissing other people. We hear that. How do you as a politician concentrate on what's important?
Well, I think the important thing is I never forget my constituents. Every decision I make, my constituents are always in the forefront of my mind when I'm making those decisions, or I'm having to make those very difficult decisions, especially if we go back a couple of years when we had that real bad period of the cost of living crisis and we had a spike in energy costs. I was the chair of Manx Utilities and I had to go out and explain the difficult decisions the island was making at the time. I personally, as an MHK, I focus on my responsibilities. I don't worry too much what's going on around me. So if I'm the chair of planning, I make sure every application is fully vetted before I give consideration. If I'm the chair of Public Services Commission, then I try to lead from the front, the board, and to make sure that I'm working with the Office of Human Resources to make sure we're making the right decisions for the island.
What do you make of the revised planning rules that are coming into force now, speeding up and simplifying planning on the Isle of Man, which, if you'd said that 20 years ago, speeding up and simplifying planning on the Isle of Man would have been unthinkable. So what's the future for planning?
Well, these advised planning, which is the Town and Country Planning Permitted Development Order 2025, it's basically come through the Cabinet Office and not through DEFA, who normally has planning responsibility. So I've removed myself from the process because obviously I don't want to conflict myself as the chair of planning. But under that permitted development, it will see advantages relating to greenhouses, to sheds, to extensions, more importantly. So somebody could replace an extension without having to obtain planning permission. I'll just put the caveat, as I did last time I was on your programme, to seek out the guidelines and the legislation and to take advice before starting any work. But for me, this should speed everything forward and we should have a positive outcome, I hope.
Could you just explain, though, when you say this came through Cabinet Office and not DEFA, how did that work? Whose idea was it? Was it DEFA's or was it the Cabinet Office?
I'm not sure exactly at what point this was, but there was parts of planning regulations and legislation that's within the actual Cabinet Office, and there's another element where the Planning Committee actually sit within DEFA. So it is a little bit confusing. We have two different bodies, but they do work together. But in respect of the regulations, the updated regulations for 2025, I, as the planning chair and as a member of the Cabinet Office, I split myself not to be involved in the decision in the Cabinet Office, but I do fully support the new permitted developments that have come through.
Okay, and certainly, I mean, we've been talking, that's about working conservation areas, greenhouse sheds and this, that and the other, porches, dormers and chimney pipes and what have you, but the big stuff, the brownfield sites and what have you.
Well, again, what this actually permitted development talks about is about, mainly ultimately, let's be honest, it's about people's homes. If they want to replace their conservatory, they may not need to get planning permission. They may just be able to do it under permitted development. The size of what you can do has increased. So before, it used to be, say for example, I built a shed in the bottom of my garden. It was within the 3 metre by 5 metres square sort of permitted development. You can actually extend that now. But as I say, please check the guidelines, and I hope that people will embrace this and we can get some work done to make the island a better place for everybody.
Okay, and could you just explain then, we'll talk the final bit about planning really. You're the chair of the planning committee, and the planning committee's job is to do what?
Well, the planning decision, we have around about 1,400 applications a year in respect of planning. 20% of those will come through to the planning committee. I chair that. We have 6 lay members. We also have officers that guide us. Normally when there's an objection, normally if it's in the public interest, it will come to the committee to make the decision. We may undertake site visits, but more importantly, we make the decision based on the evidence, based around an officer's recommendation, which we'll either accept or decline. If we decline it, then we have to provide proper legal reason for declining that application.
The question of housing on the Isle of Man, and I know you're a member of the Select Committee on Poverty, and I know it's something you've talked about a lot on the Isle of Man, and that is, this may be too broad a brush, but the underclass on the Isle of Man, people who are in poverty, and often people that just get pushed to one side, and the provision of housing, the ability for young people to get onto the property ladder. How important do you see that?
Absolutely, very important. And again, we just go back to planning. As the chair of planning, I was appointed in November 2023, and since then the planning committee has supported around about 557 new housing units on the Isle of Man, and a rough calculation, I reckon between 10 and 15% of that could be classed as affordable housing. I love the position of being chair of planning simply because it has no interference of government. It is full of lay members. We sit down and we try to make the right decisions, and we will always support affordable housing within large applications to make sure that we are delivering our commitment of providing more and more affordable housing for the island. Okay,
I apologise for the term underclass. What I'm talking about, people who are on the fringes of society.
Well, there's also social housing.
How do we get the people who are perhaps on the fringes of society back into work, contributing to society, as you say, getting somewhere to live and enjoying their life?
I think I've always been a massive supporter of something called Housing First. If we get somebody housed correctly, regardless of their financial needs or their personal circumstances, if we get somebody housed first, we can then build upon that. And I can use my own experience. Somebody who came through the care system, somebody who found himself, struggling in my 20s. I found myself a home, which then enabled me to get a job, which enabled me to go back to school, to re-educate myself to a degree level. I want everybody on the Isle of Man to succeed. And I know when I made a speech in Tynwald not so long ago, we talked about the minimum wage and let's achieve a living wage. We shouldn't inspire to just be achieving a living wage for people on the Isle of Man. We should ask people to go beyond a living wage. Let people on the Isle of Man become the best that they possibly want and can be in life.
Okay, and how do you view the Chief Minister's plan, or Comyn's plan, for taking the Isle of Man forward? Do you think we're on track?
No, I think we're slightly behind on the Isle of Plan. I don't think we are delivering enough jobs, enough opportunity. I don't think we're delivering enough homes. I've outlined what the planning committee's doing. I think the days of building social housing estates is probably gone. There's a beautiful scheme in Castletown that doesn't matter which house you buy, it'll be identical if it's social housing, first-time buyers, or open market. We need more of those estates around the island. We need to embrace communities. I think this administration has been incredibly difficult. We had the back end of of COVID. We had then the cost of living crisis, and we haven't really got over that cost of living crisis. And somebody who's now been in 2 administrations, I found this administration completely different to the first one, and I found this one incredibly difficult at times.
Okay, let's get to the lines, and we've got Howard with us on Mannin Line. Howard, you're live with Rob Callister, MHK.
Good afternoon, Andy. Good afternoon, Rob.
Good afternoon.
Just a question I saw on the internet there the other day, applicable to the Isle of Man. The housing association agenda has arisen again, and someone within government is determined for this to go through one way or the other. Now, what is the possibility, if this comes about, a housing association taking over all the government houses, I don't know about the council, but the government houses, for the Rachmanism to come into the being, whereas these people are a business, and that solely their object is to make money, and they will be paying out fairly high wages, salaries to the upper staff. But you look at the television all the time and you hear that the housing association are not doing running repairs or ample running repairs, and people are living in disgraceful conditions. Is this a possibility if a housing association is incorporated within what you term as social housing on the island?
Okay, if I can just quickly, the vision for a housing association, let's be very clear on this point, Howard. It has come from the Chief Minister. He wants to set up a housing association in order to put in the DOI's housing stock. Will local authority housing also be placed in that in the future? We don't know. I know from my own constituency in Onken there would be a very big fight, and I would support Onken keeping its own housing stock, because that belongs to the people of Onken. It doesn't belong to central government. In respect of admin and maintenance, there is a set amount of rental that's received that goes on admin and maintenance. That figure has increased. But what we do need to do is work with local authorities to make sure properties are turned around as quickly as possible, because there is an increase in the number of people waiting for housing. In respect of the housing association, you're absolutely right. We have to make sure what the cost for running the DOI's housing is today, to make sure that figure does not double or triple in the future because we're set up a housing association. I've also mentioned in conversations with the Treasury Minister and with the Chief Minister, we used to have, I think the DOI used to have around about £5 million worth of income from its housing stock, and it used to generate a surplus of around £3 million. I haven't got the up-to-date figures, but I have just asked that question in a written question to the Minister recently. So that money used to then be offset against the deficiency payment that was paid to local authorities. As you'll see from the budget, the Treasury Minister has announced a new fund of £7 million to actually fund deficiency payments in the future, but he's made no mention about the surplus of what will be collected from the DOI's housing stock. Now, what I've actually spoke to the Chief Minister on this is that £3 million should not be sitting in a housing association in the future. We should, as an island, be looking to buy properties off plan, or working with developers when they're at a very early stage to purchase properties. That will give the developers a very clear income to be able to help budget. We would also be able to take property today, which will significantly rise in cost the time they come to market. So there's opportunities for us to do things correctly in the future. But at the moment, we're still waiting for an announcement by the Minister to really tell us how this housing association will be set up, what conversations have had with the local authorities, and how that will be structured in the future.
Howard?
That's what makes, I think, a lot of people afraid. And now I've heard only a couple of weeks ago from someone that used to live in Cronkburn Village, and that was the rents down there. It was Braddon Commissioners. The rents down there were quite reasonable because they were old and small dwellings. But since it's been sold, and I think the figure quoted was about £1.5 million for the village. Doesn't seem very much, but the rents have doubled. Now it's gone into a private company. This is what will worry a lot of people with regard to a housing association, whereas the DOI will have no hold on what the rents would be. They will have no hold on what repairs are going to be, and it is a money-making biscuit. And like the steam packet, prior to the government taking it over, the companies that bought that, the banks, they used the assets of the steam packet to borrow money.
Okay.
Now, would this implication be there in a housing association that takes over the department, assets?
Okay, Howard. Bluntly, Rob Callister, do you agree with the idea of a housing association?
I agree with it being set up if it's to manage the DOI so they can focus on their core services to the people of the island. I'm very nervous around a housing association, how much it will cost, because I'm sick and tired of setting up structures which just then explode in cost. Just to go back to Howard's point on rental properties, we've got to remember that the private sector is demand-led. If there's very few properties available, prices will increase. We've got to make sure there is an abundance of property available, but we need to work with landlords to make sure that we're offering the best properties we can for rental, but also trying to make sure rents are set fair compared to either the minimum wage or the living wage on the island.
Okay, all right. Thanks, Howard.
Okay, thanks.
Cheers. I got a message in from Robin who said you were talking about the government getting involved with developers and getting stuff off plan. And Robin just said, well, shouldn't the government also get in the way of buy-to-let? People who are running big businesses for buy-to-let and buying those properties?
Well, there's always going to need private landlords to buy up property to rent out. We'll always need a rental market, so it's about working with private landlords to make sure we're offering that those very good, high-quality and sort of products at the end for the tenants need. But we've also got to look at the rents. You know, £1,600, £1,700 for a small two-bed apartment or property is too much for most people, and that is causing some of the problems.
And you must get that on a constituency basis for lots of young families and young couples with children. It's dispiriting, Rob.
It is. People at the moment cannot leave home because the rents are too high. They cannot obtain a mortgage at the right level. Government's going to have to do more to help the market. But I know from speaking to various landlords since my time in the Department of Infrastructure, we've also got to work with landlords to make sure they have an element of protection, but also make sure the tenants have an element of protection as well.
Okay, David, you're live with Rob Callister, MHK.
Hi, Randy, and hi, Rob. Hey, listen, the words you just said at the beginning is, I'll use in my manifesto for the local authority, is working with the local authorities. I believe at the current time, I don't know whether, Rob, you want to comment on this, is are certain government departments working with local authorities, getting together to move things forward? The first thing is regarding this legislation regarding draconian measures that Mr. Hooper's brought forward for his own personal reasons, as far as I'm concerned. And I do hope that when all the local authorities get together, there's one meeting tonight and one on Friday, and I hope the local authorities get together because we provide, in my opinion anyway, a valuable thing to the communities. I'm sure you'll support that. But what I was going to say was, we did have a thing regarding, do you remember large vehicles? And Jeff Robertson did an exercise and asked all the local authorities. We're having at least 7 camper vans dumped around Onken. I know there's a couple in Douglas too. There's a guy comes on from Lancaster Road where the vehicles are just lying with their backsides collapsed. And nobody seems to want to pick up the tab. That's the DOI itself or the police. And the other one I want to give you praise, I'm sorry for talking about it, but I'll get off the phone, is your support for people who are homeless. I give you a star for that one. And I just ask you, what should we be doing with Retina Bay?
Okay, all right, David. Well, about 4 in there. First of all, let's talk about, and we've talked in the past, and it'd be a nice thing to update on John, the gentleman who was homeless.
Yeah, I mean, we've all got to work to make sure people have some form of accommodation, and I hope John does find a permanent solution in the very near future. I think David also picked up an item with regard to camper vans, which we know in Onken is a particular issue. It was something was brought to my attention by a constituent last April, and there's a fantastic piece of legislation that you might want to look at, David, called the Road Traffic Legislation Amendment Act 2021, and I'll draw your attention to section 70, I think it is, which talks about a new section 3A and the power to remove vehicles causing an offence. Both the Department of Infrastructure and the local authority should be aware of that legislation. That should help you on that particular issue. You also talked about Retna Bay. Now, Retna Bay, I think, was closed in around about November, December 2024, so it's not that long ago. It can house up to 45 people at any time. We need the government to get these properties turned around again. If it comes to an end of its natural life for one particular purpose, then you're absolutely right. We need to find another purpose for this property as quickly as possible. Let's hope that in 2025, 26 or 27, we're not looking back to suddenly find that this property remains empty. We have to get properties turned around and back in use as quickly as possible.
OK, the Local Government Amendment Bill then, 2023, this is Mr Hooper and his amendments, which would, if I remember it properly, would impose on the local authority a duty to perform a specified function.
Yeah, I'll have to be honest on this. I think I said this in the keys. I think this amendment is sneaky. I think government ministers at all levels should work with local authorities where they can, and that includes on an officer level. This particular amendment came through during the clauses stage, and it was being moved by Mr Hooper as a private member. However, that private member is also in the Department of Infrastructure. And what actually happened is Mr Hooper moved this clause. It went through, but the problem is it has not been consulted on that particular clause, and that is what local authorities are up in arms with. Now, again, I've seen a letter from the Minister, Michelle Hayward, who says that we'll give local authorities 6 weeks. Well, again, under the principles of the consultation guidelines, it clearly says that all local authorities should be given 8 to 10 weeks when there's an amendment. But the problem is, on this particular circumstance, it's being moved by a private member during clauses, and that is why it's not being consulted on.
OK, all right, David, thanks for calling.
And the same, bye.
28 minutes past 12 with Rob Callister, MHK, one of the Onken MHKs, and lots of questions to get to, and we'll be back in just a moment.
A new bed? What a great idea! Especially when Miller Chaps have such a superb range. From traditional springs with Hypnos luxury wool and natural fillings to latex and the famous Temper mattress. Choose from bed frames and storage divans of all types. With friendly staff happy to explain the range, special offers throughout, and time to lie down and actually try the mattresses. When it's time for a good night's sleep, it's time to visit Miller Chaps of Ramsey.
I used to make waves. Now I ride them.
I used to ask why. Now, why not?
Well, I used to set goals. Now I'm set for life.
With no monthly fee, dedicated support and plenty of global perks. Elevate your everyday with HSBC Premier. HSBC, opening up a world of opportunity. See website for details. T's and C's apply. HSBC Bank plc in the Isle of Man is a participant in the Isle of Man Depositors Compensation Scheme, as set out in the Depositors Compensation Scheme Regulations 2010.
Ellen Vannin Fuels make it so easy to keep topped up with home heating oil this winter with our smart tank monitoring system, easy payment plans, and being able to manage your account online. Call us on 844 000. Stay warm this winter with Ellen Vannin Fuels.
It's a double header of action for FC Isle of Man this weekend with 2 games in less than 24 hours at the Bowl. On Saturday, the Ravens face Pilkington at the earlier time of 3 p.m. before taking on Prestwich Hayes in a rearranged tie on Sunday morning at 11 a.m. Join me, Rob Pritchard and Darren Timpson for FC Isle of Man versus Pilkington at 3 p.m. on Saturday and FC Isle of Man versus Prestwich Hayes at 11 a.m. on Sunday. Manx Radio will be bringing you full live match commentary on our DAB and AM 1368 channels. Live coverage of FC Isle of Man on Manx Radio is supported by Selton, investing in our community.
The Mannin Line with Andy Wint.
Rob Callister came top of the poll in 2016 and 2020. How long ago was it now?
2021 and 2016.
So you topped the poll both times in Onken. So it's a little over a year to go. So I'll ask the question, are you thinking of standing again next year?
I've said this previously. I had a few ups and downs in this administration, particularly in 2022. Obviously, I'm going to have a conversation with family and friends. I can't see me not standing because I love the job so much and I've got so much to offer. The people of Onchan will make the final decision, but I think for myself, I've grown into the role. It's taken time for me to build up, considerable experience, but also being able to support more and more of the constituents. And I've never forgotten that. I haven't disappeared for 3 years and start to come back now, or even 2 years. I've been on the coalface. If constituent needs me, then I've always been there for them, whatever time, and regardless of what role I hold.
Is it this Saturday you got a surgery?
I have a political surgery between 10 and 11:30 at the community hub in Onchan.
Okay, so what's the split of people with problems? Are they ever national problems or are they Onchan problems?
Most of them are very personal, so it could relate to housing, could relate to particular issues with a department, say, for example, Manx Care. I've only had one situation in 7 years when nobody turned up, but I always take work with me. So we have Tynwald next week, so I'll prepare for Tynwald. A lot of the time I'll arrive at 9:45 and we'll get somebody in, and people normally stay and have a cup of tea and a chat, which is fantastic until somebody else arrives. So from my point of view, it's good to actually listen to what constituents in Onchan are telling me. It also gives me an idea of what's on their minds and what they're concerned about.
A note in from Chris, 384. Could you ask Rob why he voted in favour of the removal of the triple lock and why he's changed his point of view on this?
I definitely haven't changed my point of view. I voted, I did not vote to support the triple lock being removed. I think we do need to have a conversation about what we actually do with pension payments, but I think in the future, at this moment in time, I'm absolutely in favour of keeping the triple lock.
How long was your tenure in DHSC?
Probably about 7 or 8 weeks.
Okay.
But then the investigations that followed, as I say, I went through 3 investigations that followed, not just the one relating to my sacking, but then another member put allegations in which I had to go through in June, July and August of 23. As I say, in total I went through 3 investigations, probably the darkest period in my political career. It absolutely destroyed my confidence, destroyed my trust, not just in civil servants but also political colleagues, and it was just really hard for everybody. But as I say, I stand by this day, and I'd be more than happy for every single bit of evidence relating to my sacking, relating to the investigations, to be put into the public domain, and to allow the public to decide. Unfortunately, I can't do that at the moment, but in my case I've learned a very valuable lesson, and I'd like to hope that I'm now a stronger and better politician than I was in 22.
Okay. Did you, when you were there, did you see the pickle that Manx Care would be in?
I know what I walked into, and I've never seen a department in such a difficult position. My very first day walking past an officer crying in a car park, it was an absolute mess. I would just like to put on record, I don't think the issue was Manx Care. I think Manx Care are trying to deliver the best they can in incredibly difficult circumstances. I have the utmost respect for the senior management in Manx Care. I think they've done a great job, and when I went in as the Health Minister in 22, they were incredibly supporting, and I had nothing but positive things to say about them. I think at the time it was the Department of Health and Social Care that was actually not coming up to that point, and that is why I have the greatest respect for the current Health Minister, Claire Christian, and I wish her all the very best to try and tackle some of the real deep-rooted issues that's facing our health and social care service at the moment.
Claire Christian was getting a bit of barracking in Keys the other day.
Yeah, and I think there's far too...
Wasn't you, was it?
I think there's... No, I asked a question because the Minister stood up and said that the report could be interpreted in different ways. That to me should never... And no Minister should say that on the floor of the House of Keys. So I obviously questioned that. But I was challenging, I was firm, but I was polite. But I think there's a couple of ministers, possibly 3 ministers at the moment, who have been in the Council of Ministers for many years, who are now throwing absolute rocks. And I think they should look at their own performance as well, because everybody who's been a minister fully understands the pressure and the difficulties that comes with those roles.
A note in from Alan, and this is concerning international development budget and international aid from the Isle of Man, and that is just saying, do you think the Isle of Man is justified in spending money on international development when we've got problems at home?
Yeah, I think we should have a commitment as an island, and I don't know if Alan actually knows this, but I've actually only just taken over the responsibility for the International Development Fund, which is around £2.7 million. And in recent years, the island has not spent anywhere near that amount, but we're hoping by the end of this 5-year period, we will spend the allocated amount. It's absolutely right that the Isle of Man plays its part internationally, but I absolutely take his point on board that we should also recognise some of the difficulties going on within the Isle of Man. And just to put this in context, the Isle of Man budget is around about £1.3 billion. What actually is allocated to the International Development Fund is around 2.6 million or £2.7 million.
Okay, and you're involved in the CPA as well, aren't you?
Yes.
So let's come back to this, the Isle of Man's place in the international world and what sort of part the Isle of Man plays in the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association. How much is our voice actually heard?
Well, it's like every other voice, it has an equal voice, but I think having gone away and represented the Isle of Man, which I'm proud to do, I came back from Australia in November when I was there, one of the very first big conferences I've attended, which had hundreds and hundreds of delegates right across the Commonwealth. I think the one thing that's very clear from every time that I've travelled is how well respected the Isle of Man Parliament is, given its history, its tradition. A lot of people look at the Isle of Man as the benchmark, in respect of Hansard, in respect of how we do things, how we lead sometimes. There's many bigger jurisdictions and bigger parliaments that actually look at the Isle of Man with envy, and we should never forget that. Okay,
we're live on Mannin Line today with Rob Callister, MHK, and Patrick's on the phone now. Hi, Patrick, you're live with Rob Callister.
Hi, Rob. It's nice to talk to you. Rob, I'm thinking about nursing home fees, how high they are. When someone goes in the nursing home and they're there for, say, 5 years, all their money runs out. I've noticed on a few occasions they have to be moved to a cheaper place, which to me, they're used to the people they're with. It's the end of life. Surely they should have the right to stay in the nursing home they're in. It's not happened to me, luckily, but in my family, but I think to me there should be some sort of criteria where if they spent the nursing home fees is something like $1,500 a month or something. I think it's wrong that they moved out of the nursing home. I know at least 2 occasions when this has happened.
Okay.
So I think there should be some sort of law.
I'm happy to pick this up, Patrick. If anyone has had this occasion, this sort of placed upon them where suddenly their own assets and funds run out and then suddenly being transferred to a cheaper option, I'll ask those people to contact me directly, provide me evidence, and I will actually go to Manx Care and present the case. I think there is a consultation paper out at the moment about how we fund nursing care in the future. Personally, as an MHK, I think people should be able to protect more of their own personal assets, to pay for funding. I think we have also got a sort of a generational issue here. I think maybe we should be asking our 20s and 30-year-olds to have something, to pay something into a fund that's ring-fenced to pay for their nursing care in the future. There's a lot of options on the table. You're absolutely right. Nursing home costs are far too expensive on the Isle of Man, but I understand it's a critical service. However, if anyone is facing a situation where they're being transferred to cheaper options, then please contact me.
Okay, Patrick.
Okay, well,
appreciate it.
I hope there's a law that's brought in that they can't do it. It would be good.
I think there is a full review going on at the moment about nursing care costs. I will remember this, Paddy, and I'll actually pick this up myself once I get a chance to present this to the department.
Okay, thanks, Patrick. Good to hear from you. Kate, an email in from Kate. Kate, who just said, I've got a question for Rob Callister. Is there a time limit for... You used to be chair of Onchan Commissioners, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
I was chair of Onchan Commissioners in 2013-14.
Okay. Is there a time limit for maintenance work to be completed by Onchan Commissioners? If so, what is it? I've been waiting for over a year for window catchers that don't open or close. You phone the main office, leave a message, it's passed on, and what have you, hear nothing. Is it in the system? I'm waiting patiently for nothing to be done. It's ridiculous. So what procedures are in place regarding maintenance work? Because Kate said if I stopped paying my rent, they'd certainly be in touch.
Well, I would encourage Kath, I think it was Kath, not to stop paying a rent, because that is a legal requirement. But what I would actually encourage Kath to do is to contact me, send me a message, provide me details, and I will speak to the Chief Executive of Onchan Commissioners. There isn't a time limit for maintenance work to be undertaken, but all local authorities on the island should engage with their tenants in a timely manner, should explain very clearly what repairs are required, and a time frame of when that repairs or those repairs will be carried out. So please send me details. I will pick it up directly with the Chief Executive.
Okay, this is a message in just saying... it's regarding the local authority elections are coming up next month, Rob Callister. So what made you want to become a commissioner in Onchan, and what would you say to people who are potentially thinking at such a career at any one of the 24 authorities?
Well, I think there's two reasons why people go into local authorities. One is either they want to give something back, or it's a stepping stone to possibly standing for the House of Keys. Both are very valid reasons. I stepped forward because I'd ran all pool and darts on the Isle of Man for over 28 years, and basically I was looking for a fresh challenge, something different. I then had a situation where a planning application did not sit right in my mind, and I started to look at it and I was very unhappy with what I found. So that encouraged me to think about standing. I was also very fortunate to have a neighbour who had been a very long-serving member of Onchan Commissioners, and he was able to explain to me a bit about the role, and personally I thought that was perfect, so I put myself into a by-election in November 2011. I finished a respectable third, where nobody knew me really in Onchan except those who played pool and darts, and then obviously I stood again in April 2012, and I got in uncontested. I then just embraced the role. Same commitment as I put into my role today, same commitments I do in everything, and I love the role. And then in 2016 I applied for a job after being made redundant in 2013-14, and I applied for a job and I went in. There was a panel of I hope they're not listening to this, but I went to a panel of interviewees or interviewers, and basically they said they weren't going to offer me the job, because even though I had the qualifications and experience, because they knew I was going to stand for the Keys in 2016. At that time I hadn't made any decision, but it made me think really carefully that I'd actually been earmarked to be standing. So that's the direction I took, and I was very fortunate to be elected in 2016 to the House of Keys.
Do you think it's good or preferable for an MHK to have been a commissioner before, or...?
I think it is. I think it's very important, because it gets you to understand social media, because you've got to navigate around social media, which is incredibly difficult, because your family and friends will read comments that are not true, comments that are very disrespectful and pretty nasty at times. It also gives you an understanding of building working relationships with government and government departments. It also gets you to know people and friends from other local authorities. If anybody in Onchan is proposing to stand for the local authority, I would encourage them to do it, and I will put an open invitation. If anyone wants me to nominate them or to sign their form, I'll gladly do that, because Onchan needs change, and I would encourage anyone who's passionate about serving the community or wanting to do the very best for the island, and also to learn something new themselves and to test themselves, I would encourage them to stand in April's election.
Okay, with Rob Callister. Now, the assisted dying bill and the law where this is concerned, concerned. Can I ask you what your opinion is?
Yeah, I mean, I listened to the opinion in Onken, and I'll be honest with you, Andy, this has absolutely broken my heart because it has completely split my community. You know, in Onken, I wish it hadn't been brought in this administration because I think we needed to look at the cost of living crisis. We needed to look at the effects of what COVID had on us, the damage it done to our business sector, the damage it done to our community. This administration should have been all about rebuilding. It shouldn't have been entrenched in something so difficult as the assisted dying. I did support it because I genuinely believe there is the view in Onken that the legislation should be brought in. That doesn't mean the legislation is going to be here in 26, 27 or even 28. I wish the secondary legislation had been accompanied with it because it would have given people, professionals and constituents a very clear understand how that legislation would work. Now, what I am proposing, and I'll probably put this in my manifesto if I stand next year, I will be putting in place a very clear 5-step approach should that legislation come in the future. But I know this has been incredibly difficult, and I know that I've let down constituents, but I couldn't do it. Even if I voted against the legislation, I would have let constituents down, and for that I do apologise.
OK, live with Rob Callister through till 1 o'clock today. Text, email, call and WhatsApp. Lots of questions to get to in a moment.
The Isle of Man Creamery presents stress-free food shopping with our doorstep delivery service. In time for breakfast, enjoy fresh milk, cheese, cream, Noah Bakehouse pastries, bread, coffee, juice, eggs and potatoes delivered straight to your door every day. And if that sounds good, we don't charge for island-wide deliveries. Love food and drink delivered super fresh? Sign up and order online today at isleofmancreamery.com.
Do you know, Dave, the Q Plus counter always has just what I need. Whatever plumbing job I'm working on, whether a state-of-the-art bathroom or the latest heating system, Q Plus always help. With extensive supplies, friendly, knowledgeable service and great prices, it really is the one-stop shop for trade and DIY customers alike. And if they don't have what you want in stock, they'll find it for you. See for yourself. Just take a look at Q Plus on Facebook.
Isle of Man Railways.
Get your tickets now for this season's range of onboard dining events featuring old favourites like the legendary Pie and Mash Train, the Curry Club and more, including memorable dining experiences on one of our Steam theme events with something for everyone. To find out what's cooking on the dining car or to book, call 697 457 or visit rail.im.
Isle of Man Railways.
as Gaelic Nera.
Avashan Rish.
A Gilg, the Manx Gaelic, Chinian Amera, the mother tongue of Elian Vannin, the Isle of Man.
Avashan Rish.
You can catch up with more of Manx Radio's Manx language programmes in the weekly podcast Abershan Rish. Say that again.
Avashan Rish.
Shene, that's the one.
The Mannin Line with Andy Wint.
A note in for Rob Callister then from Karen, who just said, could Mr. Callister tell everybody what's happening with nuisance?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've heard this on your programme before. This application was originally, I think it was declined in September 2022, before I became chair. I'm on the record actually saying that I fully support the development of this site, and I fully support Kell Properties actually bringing forward another application for consideration. However, because I'm on the record before I became chair of planning to say that I fully support them actually bringing forward another application, and for this site to be redeveloped, and for the lot of Douglas Quay to be redeveloped, I probably won't be able to sit on the application, but I fully support this being developed. And just to highlight, we, as the chair of planning and as the planning committee, we have embraced a number of projects in Douglas. Over the next 4 to 5 years, people will see Douglas transform, and there's some really good projects on the horizon, and I'm really happy to be behind those.
Well, I mean, what is it, 25 years ago when you couldn't move for cranes on the Isle of Man? Do you remember? Well, there was so much concrete. Everything was being built at the time, and there was a sense of momentum about the Isle of Man then. You couldn't move for people building things. There was a lot of money. Do you think that these building projects will help to transform the island?
I think they should do, and I think it will regenerate the sort of town, the look, the feel. But it's not just Douglas. We need to actually look across the island. We need to look at opportunities and, to reinvent the Isle of Man for the next 20, 30 years. And I'm hoping that, if we get Douglas right, then that will start to spread out across the island. You're absolutely right. The sight of cranes may look unsightly to some people, but it actually shows a positive sign that things are changing for the better for the island.
Okay, Gilly said, is there a possibility we're going to get an all-island speed limit? And what do you think of 20 miles per hour heading through Onken?
Well, as I've said before, I absolutely do support 20 mile an hour speed loans in residential estates. Let's be very clear on that. I also support a reduction of speed going through the village of Onken. I think far too much traffic comes through the village beyond 30 mile an hour. So there's been a campaign with both MHKs from Onken, along with a group of families, have been supporting to reduction of speed in the village. So I fully support that. But I do wonder if this is going far too wide from where it was originally planned, and especially what was being proposed by my colleague from Douglas Central, Mrs. Corlett. I think I don't support an all-island speed limit, even though I think there's very few areas on the island now where you can go beyond the national speed limit. So over time, speed limiters are being enforced or being introduced. We do need to be careful of how many of those are being introduced and where they're being introduced.
Okay, back to planning. The tramway terrace, an impasse and no obvious end. How do you see that?
Are we talking about I guess you're talking about the stable block,
yes,
where the thing. Again, as the chair of planning, I've not seen any planning applications. I mean, I can't talk about any live applications, but on that one, I'd encourage, again, an application to be brought forward by the department to improve the look, the feel, because people walk on that promenade all the time and they see scaffolding. Let's get these sites developed. Let's get these properties tidied up for the look and the feel for the island, because that will be a good positive step for the island as a whole.
JJ in Ramsey just said, people on benefits are being discriminated against when it comes to private housing landlords that are allowed to say that they won't accept social security benefits even if they've never been in rent arrears. Is that true?
Well, landlords will always have the final say of who can actually rent their property, and there's a lot of restrictions at the moment relating to, people who are single, people who have pets, people who have children. We really do need to work with landlords on the Isle of Man to get a consensus where all properties are available for rent, but we also have to make sure that both the landlords and the tenants are treated equally in this.
Okay, and the last census, there were thousands of properties unoccupied on the Isle of Man. So, I mean, if there are properties that are unused at the moment and we have people who need accommodation, surely isn't it, I mean, me oversimplifying it, isn't just a matter of putting them together.
I think the census, it was around 6,000 to 6,500 empty properties, but I think if you start to drill down on that, there's nowhere near that many that are physically just left abandoned. I know in Onken we have a situation with dilapidated properties, and over the last 7 years I've absolutely fought to get stronger legislation through, guidelines to get through, but more importantly to actually get the coroners the powers they need to enforce people who are leaving properties empty, to actually get them back on the market. And that includes, I would personally double, if not triple, the rate on empty properties after a set period of time if they're not going to get back into the marketplace. And that probably is 6 to 12 months. After that, then their rates are charged and they're doubled and they're tripled on a sliding scale.
You've just preempted Will's question, who was talking about dilapidated properties, and just said it brings down the tone of an area. area. It dispirits the neighbours, and surely Will just wonders, why do people let properties go to rack and ruin?
I don't know. It doesn't make any sense to me. But I think one of the things we have to do is to actually reverse zero rates on those properties, get them to charge rates, and then on a sliding scale, double them or triple them. Let's get these properties back in use, because people out there desperately want them, and it's causing nothing but grief for the neighbouring properties. And I again apologise to areas in Onken that have contacted me to get legislation, to get guidelines changed. I've been struggling to get this achieved, and I will continue up until the election and beyond if I get the chance.
Okay, and you mentioned earlier on that in relation to vans and motorhomes, what was that legislation? What was the rule that was coming in?
Oh, I'll have to find it again. I wrote it down because I thought there may be a question on this. I'll just, if you want to ask me another question, Andy, and then I'll come back to the last piece.
Okay, in that case, there was, there's another one. People are sending me photos of mobile homes that have been dumped. Vaping in public places. Now, you were children's champion once upon a time, and the danger that vaping poses to young people, in particular the danger of nicotine.
Agreed. I mean, we now have legislation that's coming in that bans under 18s, and I saw there was an article recently by the police in the north of the island saying that items would be confiscated if they're found with them. I think it's absolutely right that vaping should be restricted the same as any other smoking area, but for somebody who's never smoked or never vaped, it's hard to me to actually comment on that. Just very quickly, Andy, I'll just quickly give that information again to your listeners. It's called the Road Traffic Legislation Amendment Act 2021, and it's section 70, which is a new section 3A, and it's the power to remove a vehicle causing offence. And I would just like to put on record again the constituent in Onken that made me aware of that legislation last year.
Okay, we're out of time now. I just want to ask you very briefly, Rob Callister. Now, you mentioned this in the past, and this isn't going to be embarrassing, but you said once upon a time that your life went off the rails, that you had to battle to get your life back together again. What would you say to other people who are perhaps in that same situation, whose life has run out of control and has overwhelmed them?
I think it's a case of don't give up, and we as a government have to get behind those individuals to be able people to have housing first. And I know one of your callers that come in actually talks about, he's sitting in a property in Douglas when he talks and rings up the station. Don't give up, work hard, and you'll be fine. I think that's the key message.
Thanks for being with us today, Rob Callister. Good to hear from you.
Thank you.
Oh, by the way, your surgery is, once again, it's
Saturday morning, and it's 10 a.m. to 11:30 at the Onken Community Hub. Kettle is always on.
Okay. We're back with an open line tomorrow on Manx Radio. Next week, Cabinet Office Minister David Ashford's going to be with us. If you want to leave a message, 682 631, email manninline@manxradio.com. Thanks to Chris on the phones today. Enjoy the rest of your Wednesday.
WINT